All right, well, welcome back. This is the final part of episode 1 of Puzzle Streak. In this part of the episode, I'm going to analyze the puzzle that I got wrong and really make sure I try and take the most learning value from it. So this was the puzzle, and I probably didn't spend enough time on it. It turned out to be a real lesson in humility. What I did was I took the knight, somewhat thinking I was pretty clever and pretty smug, knowing that if he wanted to take my queen, I would have a nice fork on the king and the queen. And if you count that material, even after he takes the pawn, I would be, I'd be a little bit up in material. He's got 5 pawns, I've got 3. He's got a bishop and a knight, a bishop and a rook. I've got a bishop and a rook, but instead of 5 pawns, I've got 3 pawns and a knight. So technically I'd be +1 if you were counting points and material. And I just thought that was good. I didn't really calculate further to see if there would be a better move. I just kind of thought, oh yeah, we can take the knight and we're going to end up ahead of material. And really there's a number of issues with that way of thinking. Now, the one first issue is that well, let me take that back. The real big issue is that there was a better move. And it's not a difficult move to spot. The real issue is I should have just taken a rook. You know, what's better than taking a knight and ultimately giving back a pawn after a queen trade? What's better than that is, well, just taking a rook. I mean, on its face value, it's just a better move. There's no deep meaning as to why this move might be better than the move I tried. It's just simply, why not win a rook outright? You know, in this resulting position, after you take the rook outright, you are defending your knight and you're also still attacking his knight. So that's the first thing, is that it's just a lesson in humility of thinking that I'd found a really cool, tricky move, which I did. It's just that it didn't work. And really, there was just a simple move. Take a rook. Now, after we took a rook, the lesson continues, because here I'm looking at this position and I'm seeing a knight under attack. And in my mind, I'm thinking, well, black's going to have to move that knight now. But the reality is quite different. The reality is different. And it's something that came up in episode 1, part 3. So the previous episode, which you can find, I'll put a link to it now at the top right corner of this video screen. If you watch that, you'll see that there was another puzzle in there where, at one point, where I overlooked a counter-attacking idea that my opponent had, whereby I was attacking his queen with my bishop, and I just thought he has to move that queen away. Whereas in reality, in the actual puzzle, he moved his bishop away to attack my queen. And that was an idea which was somewhat of a blind spot for me, the idea of a counterattack. And it's come up again here because he doesn't actually have to move the knight away. One option is he can attack my knight. And in this position, white is still certainly better. After I take, it wouldn't even be his best move to take. But he could take here. And, well, either way, he didn't have to move this knight. Another potential possibility, rather than attacking my knight, he could put a counterattack on a piece of an even higher value. He could attack my queen. And if my queen wants to maintain its defense over this knight, it actually has to come back to f1, considering that the e2 square is covered by the knight, which doesn't have to move anywhere. Now, at this point, he can actually jump the knight away with an attack on the rook. And after the rook moves, well, now he can continue his attack on my knight. And he's basically managed to push my pieces back. And it's still good for white, don't get me wrong. But it's just the idea of a counterattack, which I overlooked completely. So first and foremost, there's a rook It's just hanging. It's a free piece, and I should have taken it. That's the real lesson here, is I should have taken the rook. But after I take the rook, just to be aware of the idea of counterattacks, rather than him having to jump the knight away straight away, just to be aware that such ideas exist, and therefore to be conscious of them, to think about them, and to calculate a few variations based on them. Now, there's some other issues with taking the knight, other than the fact that on face value, it's not as good as taking a rook. And that is that after he takes the queen, you give a check, and you take this queen, he's got a couple of really good options. One of them, which you sort of alluded to in the previous video, was this. And as you can see here, he's got, you know, a pretty strong looking pawn chain, including this protected passed pawn, which is going to be a real issue in the future. Another issue is that this knight is kind of a little bit shaky in terms of what it's achieving. It can't really achieve a whole lot up in this side of the board all on its own. And in terms of getting back home, it's not really doing a whole lot. Meanwhile, this bishop can't really develop anywhere particularly useful. And as a result, the rook can't really develop anywhere particularly useful either. And the whole end result of this is that my pieces here in this position are just really bad. And that's ultimately what gives black a nice advantage. It's also the fact that black has the possibilities of easily improving his pieces with ideas like checks and so on, or attacking this pawn and the knight concurrently. So there are those ideas to consider. But even before we get there, after we take the queen, he doesn't have to immediately recapture the pawn. And I think the most challenging sort of a line here is when he just comes in with his bishop with a check. Now, the thing you immediately notice is the only way to intercept the check is with the pawn. And firstly, he can take with his bishop, but he can also take with his rook and set up a counterattack against that knight. So even though we thought we were good winning a knight, it's very easy to imagine that we're going to have to give that knight back. And again, we could have just taken a rook. And although complications ensue, we still have won a rook. Whereas now, okay, we want a knight for a pawn, and it looks like we're probably going to have to give that knight back. And our king is looking very unsafe. If we move the king away, say to b1, well, here he can either take the pawn and continue on his merry way. Can he do other moves like rook b3 attacking the knight and the pawn concurrently? Quite possibly. And another potential move would be putting the bishop here and setting up a counterattack, discovered attack against the king. So look, I'm not going to keep this video going for too long. At the end of the day, it's not about some complex tactical idea. It's just the fact that there was a rook hanging that I missed. And again, that's why this is quite a lesson in humility for me, that you should never assume that your cleverness is going to be the thing that wins the game. Instead, you should assume that there is ample stupidity on the board from both players, that it could just be a very easy, simple move that wins the game or loses the game. And not to become so blinded by your love of your own cleverness that you come up with such clever moves that you actually end up being blinded to the simple facts of reality. And I think that's what happened here, is I got blinded by my arrogance, and also just by my lack of careful examination of the pieces on the board. So anyway, that concludes episode 1 of Puzzle Streak. Coming up next is going to be another training game. So I hope you'll join me for that, and we'll see you then.